Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, Barry. Now, today's topic of discussion is going to be pertaining to a couple of articles that I've actually read recently, both of which actually involve John Carpenter, of course, one of the biggest names in the horror genre. The first article being, apparently Blumhouse have actually got plans to reboot The Thing. Now, of course, The Thing is a classic sci-fi horror movie from 1982. Like I said, it's very much regarded as being a horror classic. It's a fan favourite among many horror fans, and is actually one of the best horror movie remakes out there. I mean, the original was 1951, called The Thing from Another World. And The Thing is, I mean, we had a prequel. We had a prequel back in 2011, which I actually thought was okay. I actually thought the prequel wasn't bad at all. But what the original 82 film still holds up remarkably well. You know, it's a movie that boasts great practical effects, you know, courtesy of Rob Bottin. You know, it's one of them movies that in the 80s, I think the 80s was actually a great decade for showcasing great practical effects, especially in the sci-fi and horror genre, with films like The Thing, The Fly, The Blob, An American Werewolf in London, etc. Now, The Thing's, it's a great horror movie. Like I said, great practical effects. It's a film that its emphasis is really on suspense and tension. It's very kind of Agatha Christie-esque, you know, not who is the killer, but who is human, who can you trust? Now, a remake, I mean, we're living in an age now where it seems to be constant remake after remake, constant reboot after reboot. I really feel like the 82's Thing is a film that really doesn't need a remake. Like I said, we had the prequel, which I actually thought was okay, somewhat underappreciated, but what it did was utilise CG. A lot of CG, and to be honest, it was a little jarring at times in the movie, whereas the original, like I said, was just great practical effects. Now, we did actually have, there was actually a sequel, but as a video game, back in 2002 that was released on the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox that did actually act as a sequel. Now, we're kind of, at the end of the, I'm not completely against remakes for the sense of, you know, if a remake comes out and it sucks, I can still go back and watch the original film. I can just pretend that the remake doesn't actually exist. It doesn't stop the original movie from existing. And I do actually believe that there are actually some good remakes out there. But I feel like, to be honest, a film should only be remade, in my personal opinion, is when a film can, due to the age that we're living in, if, for example, it was a heavily flawed film to begin with and they feel as though they can really improve on that movie. But if it's a great movie to begin with, then I often think, does it really need to be remade? Because a lot of the time I kind of feel to myself that, in a way, it's kind of a lazy way of making money off an already existing title. You're trying to sell a product just by kind of the name alone. Now, I don't particularly want to see this remade, but I would actually be very welcoming with open arms to see a continuation of the story. Because The Thing actually has what I deem to be a great ending, but it's actually one of the most ambiguous endings in the history of horror. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go into the ending in case there's people listening that haven't seen The Thing, but I'd imagine the vast majority of horror fans out there, self-respecting horror fans out there, can honestly say, yeah, they've seen The Thing. Even the original was a great sci-fi horror film. I'll admit, I think the remake far surpasses it. But that's really due to the fact of, you know, it had great practical effects and so forth actually working in its favour. The original was very much a man in a suit, but it's very much a classic. It's a classic movie of its time. A continuation of the story, because The Thing has a very ambiguous ending. I do believe it's something that could possibly be expanding on. But of course, in a way, I suppose you could kind of destroy the element of mystery and mythos to the original film by actually... Now, they've actually said that this is a reboot. They haven't actually said if this is going to be a continuation, if it's going to be a remake. We don't actually know at this point. But John Carpenter has actually showed interest. I do believe that John Carpenter will probably be on board, maybe as an executive producer, a producer. It's coming from Blumhouse, who've obviously come a hell of a long way within the horror and thriller genre, with films like, the Paranormal Activity franchise, and of course thrillers like Split and Get Out, and they've had some duds. They've had some duds along the way. Quite recently, more films like Truth or Dare and 2019's Black Christmas, which I've yet to see and literally have no intention in seeing. Fantasy Island, but they've had some good movies along the way. And 2018's Halloween, of course, which we're going to get onto soon. If this is going to happen, which I do think it is, Blumhouse are certainly showing a lot of interest in this project, I would like to see a continuation, not a remake. And also, preferably, I would like to actually see practical effects. I would always choose practical effects over CG, but I realise with that kind of age that we're living in now, there does seem to be an overutilisation of CG at times. I'm all for CG, if used sparingly. I just don't like it when it's purely used for the sake of it. And I feel like there is sometimes an overemphasis, especially when it comes to horror. There are certain movies out there that I just don't find CG to be scary, and I'd rather have practical effects. And I think by keeping it with practical effects in this reboot is really kind of sticking to the roots of the original and what the original film stood for. So that's the first. No release date as of yet. I mean, we don't know when this is even going to go into production or anything. It's just kind of in the talking stage at the moment, but that's the route I'd like to see. I'd like to see maybe a continuation of the story, just not a remake, because The Thing is still a perfectly good horror film that still holds up well now. Now, the second topic of discussion is, again, John Carpenter related, and that is, of course, it was supposed to be out October this year, Halloween Kills, the second part of the new Halloween trilogy, following on from 2018's Halloween, which of course was a huge success and actually the highest grossing slasher movie of all time, actually overtaking Scream at the box office. Halloween Kills was supposed to be October. It's been put back by an entire year. I see what they're doing now. They're obviously just pushing towards... They want a Halloween release, which is kind of ironic, really, because Halloween that came out in 2018 was the first Halloween released movie in years, for a long time. And they clearly want an October release. I mean, we could have had this film maybe in the spring or the summer, but obviously they're keeping with the Halloween kind of tradition here. They want it around the Halloween time. It feels like it's going to be a long wait. John Carpenter has actually seen the film, and the movie gets a big thumbs up from John Carpenter. Now, John Carpenter's not actually the easiest man on the planet to please. He's someone that does very much shoot from the hip. He says it how he sees it. He's seen this film and he's very impressed with it. And he's actually said that fans should be excited and that this is, to quote him, the quintessential slasher movie. Now, Halloween 2018, I really liked. I didn't love it. Love's a strong word. I certainly had some issues with it. Most notably, I think the injection of a lot of the humour, which felt somewhat forced to me. But overall, it was the best Halloween film in some time, which really isn't saying that much, because the Halloween franchise has been a very rocky road. It's a film that's been, the original movie was kind of squandered by so many countless, vastly inferior sequels, over the years. And Halloween H2O, I actually enjoyed it. That was obviously a film that was clearly following in the footsteps of Scream. If not for the success of Scream, we probably wouldn't have got Halloween H2O, but I enjoyed it. And then along came Halloween Resurrection, which less said about that film the better, because it really shouldn't even exist, because Halloween H2O had a great ending and Resurrection just completely butchered everything that Halloween H2O kind of set up. And then, of course, the two Rob Zombie-directed Halloween films, which, I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of either. I thought Halloween was actually tolerable, the 2007 one. Halloween 2, I thought was terrible. But, you know, Rob Zombie basically put his own stamp on it. You know, John Carpenter actually said to him, you know, don't copy my film. You know, put your own stamp on this, make this your own thing. And it was clearly a Rob Zombie film. Through and through, had his fingerprints obviously all over it. You know, with the profanity, the sleaze, the brutality, etc. You know, the Halloween franchise is something that Carpenter has somewhat distanced himself over the years. Obviously, he directed the film that started it all, which I widely regard as being one of the best horror films of all time. You know, it was really, in a way, kind of set the template for slasher films to follow. If it wasn't for the success of the 1978 film, we you know, it kick-started the whole subgenre. You know, Friday the 13th, Terror Train, He Knows You're Alone, the list goes on. All of these films kind of followed in Halloween's footsteps. He produced and wrote Halloween 2, which I actually thought was a good sequel. Not as good as the original, but I still think it's a good sequel. But originally, when Carpenter made Halloween, it was never intended to have a sequel. He thought the story was over, but he came on board for the second one. He was producer, he wrote it. But as the years have gone on, Carpenter has distanced himself. Now, he came on board for Halloween 2018, which he was actually an executive producer, and I actually think that there was some good stuff in there. It managed to capture some of the essence of the original movie to a certain degree. I think Joe Courtney actually did a great job as Michael Myers. I actually think he was probably the best Michael Myers since the original Nick Castle. I actually love what they did to the score, because obviously the score is, you know, it's one of the most iconic scores in the history of the horror genre, which John Carpenter, of course, composed himself. It's really simple but highly effective. And what I like, they didn't just kind of copy and paste it for the 2018 film. It's there, but they've actually tweaked it, and I actually think they did a really good job with the score for the 2018 movie. And obviously, Carpenter was an executive producer, and he's seen this film, and at the end of the day, I fully understand that, you know, he's got to promote this film. He's worked on this film, you know, to some degree, to some capacity. Is that they've got to promote this film. They're not going to say, look, I don't think you're going to like this film. I think it's going to be terrible, blah, blah. They want to get people in cinema seats. They want people to go and see this film. But at the same time, John Carpenter is kind of a man that I trust. You know, there are projects he's worked on before that he's wholeheartedly said, you know, I didn't really think it was that good, etc. I didn't quite know what I was doing for this movie, etc. I do feel like he's an honest guy, and the fact he does seem to have some enthusiasm and excitement for this movie. Now, in this film, apparently Michael Myers is more brutal than ever. Now, I'm going to assume they're excluding the two Rob Zombie directed films here, because they were brutal. Michael Myers was a complete and utter killing machine in them films, played by Tyler Mane, who I personally thought was a bit too big for the role. You know, at 6'8", he was a bodybuilder. I think even Carpenter said this, that he just felt, in the original, Nick Castle was 5'10". He was essentially a normal-sized guy. And then they just cast this hulking ex-WCW wrestler, which Tyler Mane was. But Michael Myers, apparently in this film, is going to be brutal. It's going to have a pretty high body count, which, you know, I'm all for. I mean, I still love the original. The original is hands down the best in the entire franchise, and I really love that kind of stalking aspect that the original film had. You know, that the emphasis was very much on suspense and atmosphere. That Myers actually spends the vast majority of the film actually stalking his victims. You know, he seems to get as much pleasure in the stalk as he does the kill. There was kind of a sliver of that to the new 2018 film and that. But, I mean, I'd like for them to kind of keep some of that essence of the character of Myers. But I realise that, Carpenter said it's going to have a high body count. And Mr. Farrakad once said, who was obviously the financier of the original Halloween, big Myers fan, he actually said that he never wants Myers killed off. Now, this is actually the second part in a whole new trilogy. So Halloween Ends is actually coming out the following October. Whether we see Michael Myers ever again remains a mystery, but I'd imagine we will. I think the Halloween franchise is something that's probably going to resurface every few years or so. But I actually think they took a pretty good route, actually, with Halloween 2018, actually ignoring all of the subsequent sequels. Set 40 years later, and because, let's face it, the Halloween franchise has become very kind of convoluted over the years with these kind of different timelines and that, and this seems to be a new thing as well, because they're actually doing it with RoboCop as well. I believe there's actually a RoboCop sequel that's actually coming out, it's in development, that's actually going to ignore RoboCop 2 and 3. Now, RoboCop 2 I thought was a so-so sequel. RoboCop 3, we're not even going to talk about that. And Terminator recently. Now, I haven't actually seen Terminator Dark Fate, but Terminator Dark Fate actually is kind of a true sequel to Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which is regarded by many to probably be the best film in the franchise, that or the original. But it actually ignores all of the other Terminator films. So this seems to be kind of a common trend now. But with Halloween 2018, I thought it was a good move to make. To actually, let's just get rid of the whole convoluted business and all that. Let's stick to the original. Even though, like I say, Halloween H2O was something I enjoyed. I actually think that film did a pretty good job, to be honest. It was very much in the mould of Scream, but that was the best Halloween film in years. So I'm looking forward to seeing this film. Regardless, I'm a big Myers fan. He's my favourite horror movie villain out there. Huge fan of the original, and I'll be honest, I was a little sceptical at David Gordon Green actually directing the movie. I was very apprehensive, actually, and especially with Danny McBride actually writing, I was a little unsure. And but I liked it. I liked Halloween 2018, despite it having some flaws that were very hard to ignore for me. So let's just hope that we like and love Halloween Kills as much as John Carpenter apparently does. So that's all I really wanted to talk about today. Thanks for listening. I'll be back again soon to haunt you, torment you, and bombard your ears again. Take care.